before we kind of move on to how the law looks at marital rape, it's important to define what marital rape is. So marital rape, you would define it as non-consensual sexual intercourse between a man and his wife if there is no consent, or if that consent is obtained through duress, through force, through coercion, through abuse, psychological, physical abuse. Now, in Pakistani law, we don't have a specific criminal provision or a provision in the Pakistan Penal Code that criminalizes marital rape. We have Article 375, which speaks to or which criminalizes rape. Now, if we kind of look at the history of the law, marital rape essentially was excluded from the purview of the law by the 1979 Zina Offences Ordinance, which essentially defined rape as non-consensual sexual intercourse by a man with a woman who was not his wife. So the implication there was that there's no such thing as marital rape. However, there was an amendment in the law in 2006 which removed the words "not his wife." That essentially now means that the law that we have right now, Article 375, or I apologize, Section 375 of the PPC, it essentially is a broad definition that allows any non-consensual sexual intercourse between a man and a woman, irrespective of whether the woman is his wife, whether they're related in any manner, as rape. However, there is no specific penal provision that criminalizes marital rape. The punishment for rape is given in Section 376 of the PPC, which says punishment can be by a death sentence or life imprisonment between 10 to 25 years. So that's essentially kind of what the law says about rape, essentially. And within that, because there is no specific language about marital rape, it is we generally interpret that this language covers marital rape. However, so now the problem that we have essentially when we talk about the law is that there's not a single reported High Court or Supreme Court judgment on the issue of marital rape. We have over the last few years seen some reports of women going to the police station and registering FIRs about marital rapes. But the important distinction to note is that these FIRs are registered under Section 377 of the PPC, which criminalizes carnal relations which are against the natural order, or they're unnatural. And the language of the section is that their unnatural relations can be with a woman, with an animal, with a man. So this is called the sodomy provision. And essentially the news reports that we've seen so far where women have gone and tried to register cases for marital rape, they're usually registered under Section 377, rather than Section 375, which is the main provision that deals with rape under Pakistani law. The reason why the idea of marital rape faces so much resistance, or there's a lack of recognition that marital rape is a crime, is it kind of stems from the idea the idea of implied consent or perpetual consent, that when a woman has agreed to enter into a marriage with a man, she has agreed or given her consent for a man to engage, or for her husband rather, to engage in sexual relations with her whenever he wants. So this is the implied consent theory. And this kind of because the Pakistan Penal Code, our law is based on, or was given to us by the British, their kind of their kind of understanding of marital rape stemmed from the statement of this British barrister and jurist Sir Matthew Hale, who kind of established this idea that a man cannot rape his wife, because when the wife consented to the marriage, she gave herself up to the man for sexual intercourse. So we saw that throughout the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s in the UK, this idea kept being perpetuated, that the woman has given her consent to the man. There's also secondary idea of the woman being the man's property after marriage, so therefore the man has the right to engage in sexual intercourse whenever he wants. So this idea of that when two individuals are in a marriage, and they've consented to that marriage, the woman has given her perpetual consent to allow the man sexual access. When you add that layer of, in our context, we are a country which kind of derives, also looks at Islamic principles when we're legislating or when we're enforcing laws. We also have this tendency of cherry picking Islamic provisions, and then saying that a woman can't deny her husband sexual access, which is entirely contrary to established Islamic jurisprudence, which states that marriages should be based on principles of love and tranquility and mercy. Marriages are supposed to be a safe space for both spouses. Islam outlaws violence or any kind of harm between any individuals, and frowns upon any kind of ill treatment of wives. So essentially, so basically, that's the kind of generally how it should be looked at, but we tend to kind of look at it through the lens, a very, very narrow lens of that it is the wife's duty to provide the man sexual access, and if she's not doing that, then the man can force himself upon her. So the lack of recognition of marital rape being an offense is essentially the first problem that you have, that it is not considered a crime itself, or it was not considered a crime for a very, very long time. In fact, in the UK, it was only criminalized in 1991 through judicial pronouncements, not even through legislation, through judicial pronouncements. In fact, if we look at India, there's an exception on their books right now under their Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code, which still creates an exception that under the provision that criminalizes rape, which says that a man's sexual intercourse, non-consensual sexual intercourse with his wife who's above the age of 18 is not rape. So that exception still exists on their book, and once again it stems from this very patriarchal idea that the marriage allows for the man to have access to the woman's body at any time, however he wants. Now, this is entirely contrary to the idea of consent that we've come to know and understand, and consent has to be established every time when there is an intention to have sexual relations. So consent would essentially be established the same way we establish it in any kind of rape that is outside of the marriage affair as well. So if it is against the woman's will, if it's against her consent, or if consent was obtained through duress, or in fact one of the provisions in our rape laws is that if a woman was led to believe that she was married to a man but she was not in fact married to him, that's also a lack of consent. So you would establish lack of consent in a case of marital rape the same way you would establish it in a case of non-marital rape for ordinary rape. But the problem is, in fact, the problem with marital rape is the lack of recognition that it is in fact a crime, because this pervasive idea that within the four corners of the marriage, the man has sexual access to the wife whenever he wants. So essentially, the key elements to establish a case of marital rape are not different from a case of non-marital rape or ordinary rape, although there's nothing ordinary about rape. So essentially, under our jurisprudence, a victim's testimony is enough. A statement is enough to obtain a conviction. However, when we look at how judgments are pronounced or how cases go through trial court, generally you have ocular evidence, you have medical DNA evidence, you'll have corroborating statements of witnesses. So all of these evidences, during the medical report, courts will look at injury marks, look at the samples collected from the victim's body, from the perpetrator's body, look at the relationship between the parties, and look at all other factors to establish rape. So essentially, within marital rape, it becomes a little bit more difficult because it is happening within the walls of a marriage. So there might also be family pressure, there might also be other factors involved that make it more difficult to prosecute marital rape, but the way you would establish a crime of marital rape is not very, very different from how you would establish a crime of non-marital rape. When we talk about challenges specific to marital rape cases, I think, one, there's a set of challenges that are applicable in all rape cases. So, for example, the first thing, the idea of, because we are so, as a society, we necessarily associate the idea of honor with female bodies. The idea of speaking about rape is attached with shame and dishonor to the family, so there's a lack of reporting crimes. The second problem might be a delay in reporting. A lot of times, families might take time because, once again, the question is, okay, there's so much shame and dishonor associated with the idea of reporting a rape that there might be some amount of delay in reporting it, which sometimes can lead to adverse inference when, you end up going to through court proceedings, where courts will make observations about, delays in FIRs, that why was there so much delay in recording or registering an FIR, so that's an issue. The third major issue is a lack of gender sensitization in our law enforcement authorities. As a woman, if you go to a police station with a complaint of rape, you are faced with very stereotypical patriarchal attitudes. You have police station. You don't necessarily have female police officers in all police stations who may be who may have received gender sensitization training, or who may have received specific training on how to deal with rape victims. Rape victims are supposed to be taken for medical examinations instantly, like as soon as they're in a position to go through that medical examination. Their statements are to be recorded as soon as they feel up to it. So then you have a problem. Then comes, let's suppose, if a case ends up in court, you are now dealing with judges and lawyers you're dealing with an entire system that's designed to function against women. So women definitely don't feel comfortable going to courts, don't feel comfortable about giving testimonies in open court. So you have this entire system of cases also dragging on, even though there is a law. The CRPC says that rape trials should be completed in 3 months, but we see that these cases go on and on for years, prolonging the misery of women. Then we finally come to even if the woman has crossed all these hurdles and ended up in court, there is always a question of getting the family getting pressured into an out-of-court settlement. Now, even though rape is a non-compoundable offense, families will often enter into out-of-court settlements, leading them to not prosecute the case, not come to court for evidence, which means the accused often gets acquitted. Now, these are, this is a brief overview of problems or specific challenges that you have when you're dealing with cases of rape. Now, when you add a further layer of marital rape, the key problem that, and because I think this is one of the main reasons why we don't have a single reported case of marital rape till date, is a lot of women don't necessarily recognize marital rape for what it is, which is a violation of their bodily autonomy, of their consent, of their dignity. They essentially are also, because we've also grown up in this society and we're conditioned to this idea of sexual submission to our husbands, that they don't see marital rape as a crime or as a crime against them. We recently, we've had some uproar, social media backlash against, depiction of marital rape in a popular TV drama. And while there was some backlash, there was also a lot of comments on social media justifying marital rape, and a lot of them by women, that, he is her husband, so she needs to be available to him whenever he wants. Yeah, why is she denying herself to him? So a lot of women also don't recognize that what is happening to them shouldn't be happening to them, which is why a lot of times this is not reported. Then secondly, even if there is recognition that what happened to me shouldn't have happened to me, a lot of women are not economically independent. They might not have financial resources to move out. They have families. They might have families who are wholly unsupportive of this idea that you can separate from your husband, or the families who recognize marital rape for what it is. or they have children, so they feel that this person is the father of my children, I cannot separate myself, so they won't report it. And then finally, if they do end up reporting it, we do not have a specific provision in law that deals with marital rape. So as I've said before, cases of marital rape often get registered under Section 377 under the sodomy provision. Or most times, if a woman takes a complaint to a police station, the police officers will just try to kind of send her away, saying it's a family matter and we're not going to get involved. So along with the specific challenges that are that rape victims deal with, there is an added layer of complications that any victim of marital rape might have to also deal with.